The gates of Fort Ridge opened slowly, heavy steel sliding apart like they were deciding whether she was worth letting in. A matte green military SUV rolled through and stopped at the checkpoint. Dust clung to its tires from the long road leading up to the base. Inside, Lieutenant Eliza Carter sat in silence, her posture straight, hands resting loosely on a worn field bag that didn't match the polished expectations people usually brought to a posting like this. The guard at the gate checked her ID twice, not because it was suspicious, because of the name. Carter. That name carried weight here. Everyone on Fort Ridge knew Colonel Raymond Carter, a man with decades of service, strict discipline, and a reputation for producing officers who didn't break under pressure. Some respected him for it. Others feared him. Most did both. And now his daughter was stepping out of a vehicle and onto his base. Eliza stepped down from the SUV without hesitation. No hesitation in her movement, no visible nerves, no attempt to adjust to the attention she immediately started receiving. She wore a standard-issue uniform, clean but not aggressively pressed, as if she cared more about function than appearance. Her hair was tied back in a tight regulation bun. Nothing about her demanded attention, but everything about her held it anyway. A pair of junior soldiers near the gate exchanged a glance. "She's Carter's daughter?" one of them muttered under his breath. "Yeah, heard she got assigned here straight out of Staff Academy. Lucky. Must be nice getting a shortcut." The words weren't loud enough to be official disrespect, but they weren't meant to be hidden either. Eliza didn't react. She simply adjusted the strap of her bag and looked toward the base beyond the gate. Training yards stretched out in the distance. Humvees moved in formation drills. The air carried the sound of shouted commands and distant gunfire from the range. Fort Ridge didn't feel like a welcome. It felt like a test that had already started. A staff sergeant approached her, clipboard in hand. He was older, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who had spent enough years in uniform to develop an automatic skepticism toward anything that looked like privilege. "Lieutenant Carter," he said flatly, "welcome to Fort Ridge. You're expected at headquarters." "Yes, Sergeant," she replied. Her voice was steady, not soft, not sharp, just controlled. He scanned her again, briefly lingering on her clean boots and untouched gear. "You'll be assigned temporary quarters. Don't unpack too much. This place moves fast." "I understand." That was all she said. The sergeant turned and started walking without checking if she followed. Most new officers would have rushed to keep up or tried to make small talk. Eliza matched his pace exactly, no more, no less, as if she had already calculated the rhythm of the base. They passed through the main yard. Soldiers looked up as she walked by. Some nodded politely out of habit. Others didn't bother. But the whispers started almost immediately. "That her? Carter's kid. She doesn't look like much. She's probably here for training oversight or paperwork. Bet she's never seen real field time." Eliza heard everything. She didn't show it. That was the first thing people noticed about her without understanding why it mattered. She didn't react the way they expected her to. At headquarters, the building was older than the rest of the base, concrete walls worn by time and weather. Inside, the air was cooler, filled with the smell of paper, metal, and coffee that had been reheated too many times. A captain stood waiting near the entrance. He was younger than the sergeant but carried himself with more authority, the kind that came from being trusted with command decisions. "Lieutenant Carter," he said, offering a handshake that was professional but not warm. "I'm Captain Harris. You'll be under administrative coordination with my office while you're here." "Understood," Eliza said again. Harris studied her for a moment longer than necessary. "Your father didn't mention you were coming through my command." "He didn't need to," she replied. That made him pause slightly. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't defiance either. It was certainty. He cleared his throat and gestured toward a table covered in folders. "You'll be assisting with the logistics oversight and training evaluation. Mostly observation work, nothing operational." A few officers nearby glanced up at that. Observation work. It was the kind of assignment given to people who weren't expected to contribute anything meaningful. Eliza stepped closer to the table and scanned the documents without touching them yet. Her eyes moved quickly, not casually. She wasn't reading line by line like most people would. She was absorbing structure, patterns, inconsistencies. "You've been having issues with supply routing in Bravo sector," she said after a few seconds. Harris blinked. "Yes, minor delays." "These aren't minor," she said calmly. "They're systematic. The same checkpoint is misreporting delivery timestamps. That creates false readiness reports." The room went quiet for a fraction of a second. One of the officers frowned. "We already reviewed that. It's a clerical issue." Eliza finally looked up. "It's not clerical. It's procedural. Your verification step is being bypassed under pressure conditions during shift change." The captain narrowed his eyes slightly. "And you determined that in, 10 seconds?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned one of the folders slightly, aligning it with another as if organizing something invisible. "Yes," she said. No explanation, no justification, just confirmation. The atmosphere shifted, subtle but noticeable. Not respect. Not yet. Something closer to discomfort. Because people didn't like when someone new understood things too quickly. It made everyone else feel like they had been missing something obvious. Or worse, that they had been careless. Harris closed the folder in front of her. "We'll take it under advisement." It wasn't agreement. It was dismissal dressed as professionalism. "Your quarters are outside Sector C," he added. "You'll be escorted." Eliza nodded once. "Thank you." As she turned to leave, one of the junior officers muttered just loud enough to be heard. "Let's see how long the general's daughter lasts before she asks to go home." A few quiet chuckles followed. Eliza kept walking. But as she stepped out of headquarters and back into the sharp light of the base, something in her expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Not offense, not anger, assessment. Like she was no longer just arriving. She was beginning to measure the place she had entered. And Fort Ridge, without realizing it yet, had already started being measured back. By the third morning at Fort Ridge, Eliza Carter stopped being the commander's daughter in name only. She became a story, not an official one, not one that made it into reports or briefings, but the kind that spread the moment people thought they were safe from consequences for talking. In the barracks, soldiers leaned over bunks during downtime, lowering their voices the moment someone with rank walked past. "She's still here?" "Yeah, logistics office, paperwork and observation duty." "Did you hear what Harris said? She corrected him on supply routing on day 1. Probably got lucky, or she memorized a manual before showing up." That last comment got a few laughs, but it didn't fully land the way they wanted it to. Because even in the jokes, there was something unsettled. People didn't ignore Eliza anymore. They watched her. Not because she demanded attention, but because she didn't react to it. She moved through Fort Ridge like someone who had already mapped it out mentally. Morning formations, supply runs, training rotations. She didn't hesitate near any of it. She didn't ask where things were twice. She didn't get lost. She didn't slow anyone down. That alone was enough to make people uncomfortable. On her 4th day, she was assigned to assist with training oversight in the simulation wing. It was supposed to be simple: observe exercises, record outcomes, flag procedural issues. Captain Harris made it clear before she entered the control room. "You're not here to interfere," he said. "You observe, you report. That's it." Eliza nodded. "Understood." Inside the simulation center, monitors lined the walls showing live tactical exercises. A platoon was running a hostage extraction scenario in a mock urban environment. The exercise was designed to test decision-making under pressure, communication, and timing. Several officers were already watching. Some glanced at Eliza as she took a seat in the back. One of them leaned slightly toward another. "She's probably never run a live sim before. She looks like she's here for paperwork." Eliza didn't look at them. Her eyes were on the screens. The platoon in the simulation moved through a tight corridor structure. They were coordinated, but not clean. Small hesitations, over-communication on simple movements, a delay between entry and clearance. Eliza tilted her head slightly. A detail caught her attention. A door breach timing inconsistency. Not large, not obvious, but repeated across multiple runs. She reached for a clipboard, then stopped herself. She wasn't supposed to intervene. Still, she spoke. Your entry timing is off by 1.7 seconds on corridor breach sequence 3. The room quieted slightly. Harris, standing near the monitors, turned his head slowly. That's within acceptable deviation. Eliza kept her eyes on the screen. Not in a confined environment with overlapping fields of fire, it creates exposure windows. A senior instructor scoffed. We've run this exercise dozens of times. That margin doesn't matter. Eliza finally looked up at him. It wasn't challenging, not emotional, just precise. It will matter under stress conditions, she said. That was all. The instructor opened his mouth, then closed it again, annoyed more by her certainty than her words. Harris stepped in before it escalated. Noted, Lieutenant. We'll review it later. Translation. End the conversation. Eliza returned to the screens without reacting. But something subtle had changed in the room. People weren't dismissing her as easily now, because she hadn't argued like someone trying to prove herself. She had spoken like someone correcting an error she had already seen before. Later that afternoon, she was assigned to inventory verification in the supply depot. It was supposed to be routine. But within 20 minutes, she stopped at a storage rack and frowned slightly. A private nearby noticed. What's wrong? He asked. Eliza scanned the labels again. This batch is misclassified. The private blinked. That's been approved already. It's mislabeled, she repeated. He shrugged. Then take it up with logistics. It's not our call. Eliza didn't respond immediately. She crouched slightly, checking a second container, then a third. Her eyes moved quickly, calculating something internally. This isn't a labeling error, she said quietly. It's a routing correction that was never updated across systems. The private stared at her. I don't even know what that means. She stood up. It means your readiness count is inflated by 8% in this sector. That number landed heavier than anything else she had said all day, because readiness percentage wasn't just paperwork. It affected deployment decisions, training schedules, operational confidence. If she was right, someone had been making decisions on bad data, and no one liked that possibility. By evening, the whispers had grown sharper. She's digging too deep, or she's guessing and getting lucky. She corrected Harris twice already. That doesn't happen unless you've actually done this before. That last line didn't get laughed off like before. It lingered. Because now people were starting to notice something else. Eliza wasn't learning Fort Ridge. She was predicting it. In the barracks that night, a junior officer watched her from across the yard as she stood alone near the perimeter fence, looking out over the training grounds. She wasn't on her phone. She wasn't socializing. She wasn't trying to fit in. She was just observing, like she was waiting for something the base hadn't shown her yet. And somewhere deeper in the command structure, her name was beginning to appear more often in quiet conversations that ended abruptly when someone entered the room. Not because she had done anything wrong, but because she was starting to look like someone who knew more than she was supposed to. The announcement came without warning. A joint operational training exercise was scheduled at Fort Ridge, involving an elite rapid response unit rotating through the base for evaluation and coordination drills. For most personnel, it meant extended hours, tighter supervision, and higher expectations. For the staff already uneasy about Lieutenant Eliza Carter, it meant something else entirely. More visibility, more scrutiny, and more chances for her to be proven either right or completely out of her depth. Captain Harris called the briefing early in the morning. The room was packed tighter than usual. Officers standing along the back wall, instructors seated near the front, and a few senior visitors from the visiting unit observing quietly. Eliza sat near the side, not front row, not hidden. Neutral position. The kind of placement that didn't invite attention but didn't avoid it either. Harris began the briefing. This exercise will simulate a multi-point urban containment scenario. Objectives include rapid coordination, target isolation, and controlled extraction under communications interference. He clicked to the next slide. Eliza's eyes moved across the map instantly. Something about it didn't sit right. Not wrong in an obvious way. Not a mistake anyone could point to immediately. But incomplete. She didn't speak yet. Others did. A major from the visiting unit raised a concern about corridor spacing in Sector Delta. An instructor responded. Another officer added logistical constraints. The conversation moved quickly, layering assumptions on top of assumptions. Eliza stayed silent, but she was tracking every detail. Timing windows, response overlaps, evacuation routes. And the more she looked, the clearer the problem became. Finally, she spoke. Sector Delta will collapse under current timing assumptions. The room didn't fully stop, but it slowed. Harris looked at her. Explain. Eliza stood, stepping closer to the map. No hesitation. The evacuation route through the East Corridor intersects with the reinforcement entry path. If both are activated simultaneously under interference conditions, you'll create a bottleneck with no fallback route. One of the instructors shook his head. That's accounted for. We stagger entries. Eliza pointed lightly at the map. You're staggering based on ideal timing intervals, not degraded communication conditions. Silence followed that. A visiting major narrowed his eyes slightly. Degraded how? Eliza answered immediately. Signal disruption at relay point 3. If that goes down, your sequencing collapses. You'll lose synchronization within under 90 seconds of engagement. That number again. Precise, immediate, unhesitating. Harris stepped forward slightly. We tested relay point 3 last month. You tested it under controlled load, Eliza said. Not under simultaneous multi-node interference. Those are different stress profiles. The major from the visiting unit studied her now, more carefully. Not dismissively, analytically. Lieutenant, he said, have you run live field coordination before? Eliza met his gaze. Yes. Just that. No elaboration. The room shifted subtly again. Not because of the answer, but because of how she delivered it. Calm, certain, without effort. Harris closed the discussion before it could expand further. We'll note the concern and adjust parameters if needed. Let's proceed. But the atmosphere didn't reset, because now the idea had been planted. Something might be wrong with the plan, and she might be the only one seeing it clearly. Later that afternoon, the visiting unit ran a partial dry simulation. Eliza observed from the control room again, but this time the silence around her was different. Less dismissive, more watchful. The simulation began cleanly. Units moved according to plan. For the first 2 phases, everything held. Then the interference marker activated. Communication delay spikes appeared on the monitors. At first, it was minor. A second lost here, a delayed confirmation there. Then it compounded. Exactly as Eliza had described. A junior instructor frowned at the screen. That's higher than expected variance. Harris leaned forward slightly. The visiting major didn't speak, but his expression tightened. On the screen, 2 units attempted simultaneous entry into overlapping corridors. The bottleneck formed almost instantly. Coordination broke. Commands overlapped. One team halted mid-movement, waiting for confirmation that never arrived on time. The simulation didn't crash, but it degraded. Badly. When it ended, the room stayed quiet for several seconds longer than usual. No one rushed to speak, because now it wasn't theory anymore. It had happened. Harris finally exhaled. We'll adjust sequencing protocols. The visiting major didn't take his eyes off the screen. That wasn't a minor deviation. No, Harris admitted. It wasn't. Eliza said nothing. She didn't look satisfied. She didn't look disappointed either. just observant, like she had expected the outcome all along. That reaction unsettled people more than if she had celebrated being right, because it suggested she wasn't guessing. She was confirming. That evening, Fort Ridge felt different. Whispers didn't sound like speculation anymore. They sounded like caution. She called the simulation failure before it happened. That wasn't luck. She's been right too many times, or she knows something she's not supposed to. In the command office, Harris reviewed the simulation logs twice, then a third time. Each time, the same conclusion formed more clearly. The lieutenant's warning wasn't general insight. It was operational accuracy, too precise for coincidence, too consistent for theory alone. Across the base, Eliza stood alone near the edge of the motor pool, watching vehicles being prepped for the next phase of training. Her expression remained unchanged, but something had shifted. Not in her, in how she was being seen. And somewhere deeper in the system, without anyone fully realizing it yet, her presence had stopped being treated like an administrative assignment. It was starting to feel like a variable no one had planned for. The call came at 04:17 hours. No warning brief. No extended preparation. Just a sharp change in tone across the base that pulled everyone out of routine and into motion. A civilian transport convoy, operating just beyond Fort Ridge's primary response perimeter, had gone silent. 2 security vehicles, 1 medical transport, 8 personnel total, including a contractor team supporting communications infrastructure. Last transmission had been fragmented, interference, then static, then nothing. By the time the situation reached Fort Ridge Command, it was no longer considered a delay. It was an active emergency. Captain Harris stood in the operations room, eyes locked on the shifting map display. "Route last confirmed here," an analyst said, marking a stretch of road cutting through uneven terrain and sparse forest cover. "Could be mechanical failure," someone else added. Harris didn't answer immediately. His attention moved across the data feed. Signal dropout pattern, timing, terrain. Then he made the call. "Rapid response unit deploy immediately. Standard recovery protocol." The room moved instantly. Orders were passed, equipment verified, teams assembled, and Lieutenant Eliza Carter, who was not part of any tactical response roster, was assigned, almost automatically, to a support coordination role attached to logistics oversight. It was supposed to keep her out of the way. It didn't. She arrived at the staging area already fully equipped, not rushed. Not adjusting straps or checking gear last minute like some of the others. Her movement was controlled, deliberate, as if she had already accounted for every possible delay. A sergeant glanced at her as she approached. "You're not on the assault element," he said. "I know," Eliza replied. "Then why are you here?" She looked past him toward the vehicles being prepped. "Because your recovery route is wrong." He frowned. "Excuse me?" But she was already walking toward the map table. Harris noticed her approach and stepped in. "Lieutenant, this is a live operation. Your support only." Eliza didn't stop. "Your convoy isn't stalled. It's been redirected." That sentence cut through the noise around them. Harris narrowed his eyes. "Based on what?" "Pattern delay in comms, followed by complete silence, doesn't match mechanical failure or accident," she said. "It matches forced rerouting under controlled interception." A few officers exchanged looks. One of them spoke. "You're saying ambush?" "I'm saying interception," Eliza corrected. "There's a difference in intent. This one is controlled. They didn't destroy the convoy. They removed it." The room went quiet again. Harris stepped closer to the map. "If you're right, what are we dealing with?" Eliza finally met his eyes directly. "A secondary force that already knows your response timing." That landed harder than anything else she had said so far, because it implied planning against them. Not random violence, not opportunistic attack, coordination. Harris hesitated only a moment longer. Then he changed the deployment order. "Adjust route, alternate ingress through North Ridge Line, avoid primary corridor." A few officers reacted immediately. That adds 12 minutes to response time. If she's wrong, we lose the window. Harris didn't look away from Eliza. If she's right, we walk into a trap. That ended the argument. The convoy response team moved out. The first 20 minutes were clean. Then everything changed. Eliza remained at the command support station, watching live feed overlays and intermittent drone recon data. She didn't pace. She didn't ask for updates. She watched patterns. Then she noticed it. A gap in expected movement timing. Not from their unit. From something ahead of them. She leaned forward slightly. "There," she said quietly. Harris turned. "What?" She pointed at the screen. "That's not terrain delay. That's controlled pacing." The analyst frowned. "Controlled by who?" Eliza didn't answer immediately. Her eyes tracked the movement vectors. "By someone matching their advanced speed exactly," she said. That shouldn't have been possible without surveillance. Yet it was happening. On the screen, the response team advanced through the alternate route. For a brief moment, everything looked stable. Then comms interference spiked. Not total blackout, but degradation. Enough to break coordination between lead and support units. A voice crackled through the speakers. Visual contact, possible obstructions ahead, then static, then silence. Harris straightened. Re-establish link. "Trying," someone replied. Eliza's voice came again, sharper this time. "Stop forward movement." The command room turned toward her. Harris didn't hesitate. "Why?" "Because they've been funneled into a kill corridor," she said. A beat of silence. Then the radio crackled again. A fragmented transmission. "Contact. Multiple hostiles. Trapped. Requesting." It cut out. Immediately the room shifted. Orders fired rapidly. Harris grabbed the mic. "Hold position and await extraction backup." Eliza shook her head slightly. "If they hold position, they lose mobility advantage." One of the senior officers snapped. "Then what do you suggest?" Eliza looked at the map again. Not rushed, not panicked, calculating. "Split formation immediately. 2-unit dispersion. Use staggered retreat through elevation break South Ridge. They're being herded into a narrow channel. Break the channel." Harris stared at her. "That's not in protocol." "It should be," she replied. For a moment, no one moved. Then the feed showed it. The lead unit had halted. Confusion visible even through low-resolution thermal overlay. And then movement, fast, coordinated contact emerging from blind zones along the terrain edges. Not chaotic attackers. Positioned, waiting. Exactly as she had described. Harris made the decision. "Execute Lieutenant Carter's adjustment." The order went out. Reluctantly at first, then urgently. What followed wasn't clean. The response team split under pressure conditions. Movement became fragmented, but it broke the predicted engagement shape. Instead of being surrounded, they created spacing. It disrupted the interception pattern. Not fully, but enough. Enough for extraction support to reach the outer edge of contact zone. Enough for wounded personnel to be pulled out. Enough to prevent total containment. Back at Fort Ridge, the command room watched fragmented updates roll in. Chaotic, incomplete, but trending upward. Not victory. Survival. Harris didn't speak for several seconds after the final extraction signal came through. When he finally did, his voice was lower. "We would have lost them in that corridor." No one argued, because the data confirmed it. Eliza stood near the back of the room, still watching the display. No celebration, no visible relief. Just confirmation that the pattern she had seen earlier was correct again. A junior officer looked at her differently now. Not openly, not dramatically, but with uncertainty replaced by something more serious. Recognition. Not of rank, of competence. Harris finally turned to her fully. "You've done field coordination before," he said. It wasn't a question anymore. Eliza paused for a fraction of a second, then answered simply, "Yes." That single word carried more weight than anything else she had said since arriving at Fort Ridge. Because now it wasn't theory. It wasn't training. It was survival. And everyone in that room understood, without it being said out loud, that something about Lieutenant Eliza Carter didn't match the file they had been shown. Not even close. The convoy survivors returned just after dawn. Not as a clean success story, not as a neatly wrapped operation, but as fragmented reality. Damaged vehicles, wounded personnel, exhausted medics, and a silence that followed them through the gates of Fort Ridge like something too heavy to speak aloud. No one celebrated. That was the first unusual thing. Fort Ridge celebrated everything that ended without total loss. Even partial recoveries got brief acknowledgments. A nod in the debrief room, a line in the report. Something. But this time, the base felt different. Because too many people understood the same uncomfortable truth. Without the adjustment made mid-operation, there wouldn't have been survivors to report anything at all. Inside the operations building, the debrief room was already full. Captain Harris stood at the front, arms crossed, watching the final tactical overlay replay on the screen. The map showed the interception zone, the split maneuver, and the narrow escape corridor that had been created under pressure. A senior officer from higher command had arrived during the night. No announcement, no explanation, just presence. He didn't sit. He observed. Lieutenant Eliza Carter stood near the side wall, hands relaxed at her sides, expression unreadable. She had been asked to attend the debrief, but no one had specified her role anymore. That, in itself, was telling. Harris spoke first. The convoy was redirected into a controlled interception zone, he said. Lieutenant Carter identified the pattern shift and recommended immediate adjustment to response routing. That adjustment prevented full containment. He paused. No one interrupted. Because no one disagreed. A second officer added, "Enemy coordination level indicates pre-planned anticipation of our standard response protocol." The room stayed quiet. Then the visiting senior officer finally spoke. "Which means they knew how you would move before you moved." That sentence changed the atmosphere instantly. Because it wasn't just about a failed operation anymore. It was about exposure. Someone was studying Fort Ridge. Or worse, had already studied it. The senior officer turned slightly toward Harris. And the adjustment that broke their setup came from her. Harris didn't respond immediately. Because now everything came back to one uncomfortable point. Eliza Carter. The lieutenant who wasn't supposed to be anything beyond logistics oversight. The lieutenant who corrected training simulations, who identified structural flaws in planning, who predicted failure before systems showed warning signs. The senior officer stepped forward slightly, eyes now fully on her. "Lieutenant Carter," he said, "before we proceed further, confirm your operational background." The room tightened. This was no longer routine questioning. Eliza didn't look away. Her voice remained steady. "Which part?" That answer alone made a few people shift uncomfortably, because it implied there was more than one. Harris narrowed his eyes slightly. "All of it." A long pause followed. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just controlled silence. Then Eliza spoke. "I was assigned here under administrative cover," she said, "but my prior deployment history is classified under Joint Special Operations Command." A few officers exchanged quick glances. Harris straightened slightly. "Special Operations doesn't explain predictive analysis like this." Eliza nodded once, as if acknowledging the point. "Then you're only looking at one layer." That line landed heavier than anything else she had said. The senior officer studied her carefully now. "Clarify." Eliza hesitated for the first time since arriving at Fort Ridge. Not uncertainty. Choice. Then she continued. "I didn't come here to learn how Fort Ridge operates," she said. "I came here to observe how standard units adapt under pressure when they believe they are operating correctly." The room went still. Harris frowned. "That sounds like evaluation language." "It is," she replied. A beat passed. Then the senior officer asked the question that shifted everything. "Who authorized your presence here?" Eliza didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her uniform pocket and placed a folded document on the table. No flourish, no ceremony, just placement. Harris stepped forward and opened it. His eyes scanned once, then again. His expression changed, not dramatically, but enough that everyone noticed. Because the document wasn't just an assignment order. It was a controlled operational evaluation directive, signed at a level above base command authority, higher than Fort Ridge, higher than regional command. A sealed directive authorizing embedded assessment of operational readiness, decision-making integrity, and procedural bias under real-world conditions. Harris looked up slowly. "This isn't a standard assignment." Eliza answered simply, "No." The senior officer took the document next, reading it without expression. Then he said something that made the room feel smaller. "This authorization places you as an observer under Tier 1 evaluation protocol." A silence followed that was deeper than anything before it, because now the implications were clear. Eliza hadn't been reassigned here because of her father. She hadn't been placed in logistics. She hadn't been observing. She had been embedded, watching how they behaved when they thought she didn't matter. The senior officer looked at her again. "And your operational identity?" Eliza didn't hesitate this time. "I've served in classified direct action units," she said, "under multiple designations. My record is compartmentalized." A few officers visibly reacted now. Not disbelief, reassessment. Because suddenly, everything they thought they knew about her behavior made sense in a different way. The precision, the pattern recognition, the calm under pressure, the immediate understanding of failure conditions. Harris leaned back slightly, as if the weight of it had shifted something internally. "So, every correction you made," he said quietly, "was a part of evaluation," Eliza finished. "No pride in it, no satisfaction. Just fact." The senior officer closed the folder, then spoke again, this time addressing the entire room. "This base was observed under live operational conditions during a hostile contact scenario," he said, "and the embedded evaluator directly influenced survival outcomes based on identified procedural failures." That statement settled heavily, because it meant something no one in the room could ignore. They had been tested without knowing it, and judged in real time. Harris looked toward Eliza again, but differently now. Not as a problem, not as an anomaly, as something closer to an uncomfortable truth. "So when people assumed you were here because of your father," Eliza finished the thought for him, "they were wrong. No anger, no correction, just finality." A few seconds passed. Then something shifted across the room. Not sudden, not dramatic, but real. The dismissiveness that had followed her since arrival was gone, not replaced with admiration, replaced with understanding of consequence, because every assumption they had made about her had been based on incomplete information, and every moment they dismissed her had been a moment where they ignored accuracy in favor of comfort. Harris finally spoke again, quieter than before. "What happens now?" The senior officer looked at Eliza. "That depends," he said, "on the final assessment report." Eliza gathered the folder from the table. She didn't look back at the room. But before she left, she said one last thing. Not to provoke, not to punish, just to close the loop. "Good units don't fail because they lack skill," she said. "They fail because they stop questioning their assumptions." Then she walked out. No applause followed, no dramatic reaction, just silence. But it wasn't the same silence as before. It was the kind that stays behind after something has been permanently understood. And just like that, Lieutenant Eliza Carter was no longer the rumor that had followed her through Fort Ridge. She was the reason the base had learned something it didn't know it needed to learn. Over the following days, reports were rewritten, procedures were reviewed, and quiet corrections were made across training protocols that had once been taken for granted. Nothing loud, nothing public, just change, slow, steady, and irreversible. As for Eliza, she didn't stay long enough for ceremonies or speeches. She never did. She left the same way she arrived, without drawing attention to herself, but leaving behind a standard that others would be measured against long after she was gone. And the people who once assumed they understood her never made the same mistake again, because now they knew what it cost to assume too early. Thanks for watching this story all the way through. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more military-style stories like this one.